Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. So what about all the refugees from Ukraine, and 2 million of them have gone into Poland? What's happened there? We've done some shows on what's going on in Ukraine, but what's going on with refugees, and how are different towns and cities and countries accommodated them? Waldemar Plusa from Włocławek, Poland, has contacted me. He's part of a Rotary organization that is organizing some funding to educate and to house and to feed some people, some 200,000 Ukrainian refugees that have come into a city. Welcome to our show. How are you, sir?
I'm fine, thank you. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. I apologize. I've mispronounced your name. How do I pronounce your name again, sir?
It's Waldemar Plusa. It's difficult
Waldemar
because
Plusa, and really... the name of the town you're from?
I'm actually in the city of Wrocław, which is in the southwest part of Poland. It's the fourth largest city in Poland. Fourth
largest city, and it's I think 600,000 people, you said?
Yeah, 600,000 people plus 100,000 Ukrainian people before the war. Since the war started, close to 200,000 Ukrainian refugees came to the city as well. So right now, I may say we are around 800,000 people.
200,000 people for a population of a city of 600,000. So you've increased in size by a third.
Exactly. And you can see it. You can see it on the streets. You can see it in various places, and all the places that could accommodate people are packed. Sports halls and meeting places, some hotels. My friend who is managing Radisson, which is a 5-star hotel, they allocated 11 rooms from the day one. So there are around 50 people staying at Radisson, being fed and looked after. Yesterday we had a Rotary meeting, and one of the ladies who stays in the hotel, she stays there with her daughter, 16-year-old, her oldest son, and the husband stayed in Ukraine to fight. That's the story.
How does a city of 600,000 people absorb another 200,000 people? Like, there's got to be people living in every second or third home.
Well, actually, that's exactly what it is. A lot of people came, and especially women with children. We don't see that many men coming, although they were here working before. So maybe that's why the women came, knowing that the husbands are here working. But I think majority of the men who were working from Ukraine in Wrocław, they went to Ukraine to fight. So mostly women stayed behind, and the situation is such that a lot of families opened their doors and houses to accommodate them. We have some sporting facilities that are being turned to places to stay. So you can imagine a place of, I'm not sure how to compare, but let's say if somebody remembers Maple Leaf Gardens, for example, if you can imagine the entire floor is taken by the beds, and there is no curtains whatsoever, and there is like 300, 400 people sleeping, waiting for the things to happen. And it's a very tragic view. I mean, me myself, I was a refugee in 80s. I went through Traiskirchen, which was a refugee camp in Austria, and I know how it feels. Before I came to Canada, I spent a year in Austria, and I came to Canada, and we tend to never forget things that we experience in such a magnitude, especially with people who are so close to our border.
You were a refugee from Poland?
Well, I left in 1981, and just before the martial law was declared, and Austria accepted me and my brother and his wife and a child, and we were turned to a refugee camp in Traiskirchen near Vienna. My family, my brother and his wife were fortunate because Canada had a program to bring the families to Canada. As it happened, I was in the family. Even though I was a brother, then Canadian Embassy in Vienna said, then you have to wait for your turn or look for a private sponsor. So fortunately for me, a year later, I was able to join my brother, and I spent 28 years in Canada, and I left Canada to come to Poland to do something on a social level, meaning look after people stricken with cancer in 2010. I visit Canada, and Canada is my second home. I regret not being in Canada for the last 2 years, but I reside now in Wrocław. I'm a proud member of Rotary Club Panorama, and that's where we met. And the chance had it that Brian invited me to take the part in a meeting in Mississauga. I didn't really know what's going on with Rotary Club. I knew the clubs like that exist, but now I understand what they exist for, because now it's the time that I truly can place somebody above myself.
And we'll come back to this we'll come back to this in greater detail. But your current Rotary Club that you're a member of is organizing a fundraiser. Tell me a little bit about it, if you could.
Well, as any organization which is not governmental, we are trying to be as helpful as possible to the people who came, and especially mothers and children. Yesterday, we received a truckload of various things from France. Rotary Club in France, women in that club collected a lot of things, especially hygiene products for women, for kids, Pampers, food, formulas, rice, whatever we requested, because it's still to some degree a burden of people who provided accommodation, right? The food is crucial, the clothing is crucial, the hygiene things are crucial. Because as anybody who is a parent knows, the Pampers are not necessarily cheap. The same applies to everything else. So any help assists greatly. One has to remember that as a club, as a people, we do it from our heart. We are not supported by a federal government in Poland. We don't get the money. Nobody gets the money to say, okay, you bring the 5 or 10 refugees to your house, we're going to pay for it. No, it's not like that. I mean, from the day one, when the war started and people started to cross the border, as you said, 2.2 million people came to Poland. And they came to Wrocław because Wrocław had a tradition before the war that Wrocław was built by some of the, after the war, there was maybe 100,000 Ukrainians who came to Wrocław. Because as one has to remember in history, Wrocław before the war was called Breslau, and that was 800,000 people, German city, absolutely beautiful. And during the war, 70% of that was destroyed by nobody else but Russians, who came to liberate the city, but they pounded the hell out of it. The city was absolutely 70% destroyed by unnecessary violence. And what we see in Ukraine now on the television, this is exactly what the Wrocław looked like, which is very sad for me. I have tears in my eyes to think about it, that this is senseless. You know, I understand the war, but I don't understand during the war that you have to destroy the cities, especially for Russians who behaved like that 80 some odd years ago. And this is not the way it should be. I mean, I see it in people's eyes from Ukraine, how saddened they are to see that they may not have a place to go back to. Because how are we going to go back to, to rebuild the city that is destroyed 90%, like Mariupol?
To rubble. It is just astounding. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back more with Waldemar in just a minute. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting tonight with Waldemar Plusa. He says, to make it easy, I'm going to be able to call him Val, which I'll do so I don't mispronounce his name. He is a member of a Rotary Club in southwestern Poland, and they are embarked on a fundraising campaign to assist with all the refugees. The town, just give us a geography lesson for a second here. You said it was a German town in southwestern Poland. So was this part of Germany or was this part of Poland? And tell me a little bit about the history and the geography of your city, if you could.
Actually, the city is a 1,000-year-old city and actually changed hands throughout history from being Czech, being Polish, being German. And for the last couple hundred years before the war, it was a German city. Actually, the city is beautiful. It sits on the meeting place. You know, as we know, the meeting place, it's what Toronto is all about.
Yep.
But the meeting place, Wrocław edition, is because the city is placed on the 4 rivers that meet in Wrocław. And before the war, it was absolutely beautiful city, probably one of the nicest cities in Europe. A very prominent 10 Nobel Prize winners came from a city of Breslau, of Wrocław. So the education was extremely strong. The architecture was absolutely stunning. Beautiful streets and everything else. And everything lasted till 1945, when Hitler decided to defend the city at any cost, and the Russians started to pound as much artillery as possible. And after they conquered the city and the guy who defended it on the German side left a story, they demolished 600 beautiful, huge buildings, 3 churches or 2 churches, to make a landing field for an airplane within the city. And the only plane that left was with this Hitler guy who was defending the city at any cost. 70% of the city, as I said, was left in rubble. And on the top of that, when the Russians came, they robbed everything that they could. So they put it on the trains and transported it into Russia. And in 1945, people from Ukraine and other places in Central Europe started to come to the city of Wrocław to live, to rebuild. And the process is still ongoing. It's just absolutely staggering job to rebuild the city. And we have, 80 years after the war. So when I look at Ukraine, that my heart breaks, because if you see a city basically turned to rubble, then how the heck are you gonna live? So Wrocław, right now, 600,000 people, 120,000 students. So the same like Mississauga, let's say, or Toronto, at the University of Toronto, where you have close to 100,000 people, I would imagine, studying. So it's a young, vibrant city, and very much multicultural, which I like. I mean, I like that there is a little bit of that Canadian feel to me, that you have people from all over the world, and there is a certain amount of tolerance. I mean, it's still in a process in Poland. You know, it's not like we experience in Canada, and we have everybody. That's still ongoing process, and it's difficult, but you know, I prize myself and I try to teach those people that we are all the same. We are in the same position. Life is given to all of us, and we have to cherish everybody's life and ours as well. That's why when I was accepted to Rotary Club with this beautiful slogan, service above self, then I figured this is something that I strongly believe.
And the city, you say, is in the southwest part of Poland. So
southwest part of Poland.
German border, close to Berlin?
It's 3 hours away from Berlin, believe it or not. 3 hours away from Berlin. Before the war, 3 trains a day were coming from Berlin to Wrocław. Very much, as I said, city of education.
And how far from Warsaw?
From Warsaw, we have 360 kilometers. So to Prague, we have 2.5 hours, 3 hours, let's say, in Czech Republic.
Right, so closer to Prague, closer to Berlin than it is to Warsaw.
Ukrainian border, we have 400 kilometers.
And
The
so
Ukrainian
the people that are
border.
coming
To
from
Lviv.
Ukraine or what are coming through Krakow to come toward you?
Well, they come various ways. A friend of mine who works for the government, local government, he actually went with the train to Lviv, which is the nearest big city, Lviv, as they say it in English, which is 500 kilometers from Wrocław. And I would believe, 2 or 3 trains came with refugees, full of refugees, 600 people on each train. And they were rescued and were very, very, well, happy is the wrong term in times like that, but they were relieved that they escaped the atrocities of war.
Now, do you think
So,
most people are planning on going back, or are they planning on staying, or are they
it's
planning on
difficult to
moving on?
say. The lady that attended yesterday meeting, she left everything there. I'm meeting a professor from the Academy of Fine Arts from Lviv in the next few days. She had a school, private school open in her neighborhood, teaching kids and adults and teenagers about arts, and everything was left behind. So she came with nothing. One has to remember that when people ran, most people came with one suitcase, a backpack, maybe a plastic bag. Those are the most difficult situation to comprehend, that you actually leave your house and you grab what you can, and that what you grab, it fits to the backpack. And yet the entire life, books, clothing, everything that you worked for, it's left behind. So we are helping, as myself and my partner, we are helping a boy and a mother who came to Wrocław maybe a week ago. And the boy saw with his own eyes when that his grandfather lost his life. So he witnessed the killing of his grandfather. And you hear those stories over and over, then the kids experience something that they can only envision in some silly, stupid, unnecessary video games about the wars. Now it's real.
How was the grandfather killed?
Well, it's by Russians. I mean, I don't know the details. I don't want to even discuss the details because it's traumatic enough. One has to realize then, I love Russian cultures. I love what Pushkin did for me, what Chekhov and others did for me, what Tchaikovsky does to my soul. I love that with a passion, but one has to also remember that Russia is a huge country, it's the biggest country in the world. And Putin, being who he is, if I may voice my opinion, he seeks the people to collect the army of people who are in a position that they never saw the city, for example. They live in small villages near Siberia and other places. So for them, if Mother Russia wants them to go and fight and they're being lied to, then they go, because they joined the army. This is the only thing that they can have, that they go to some organized situation, they get paid a little bit, and they are trained to fight. So no surprise when they came to Ukraine, as we know, they were surprised, and they actually came not to be greeted, but to fight. That's why I believe that over 15,000 of those young kids, because this is the young people's war. This is not a war of 60, 70-year-old. Never was.
Yeah.
But when somebody comes from the rural area of Russia, for whom internet is even like a mystery, because they never saw it, they never maybe held a smartphone, and they are given a gun or a tank to be driven, they are already exhausted.
They follow orders.
Happy that they do something, right? So for them, I believe, and we experienced that during the World War II from the history, anything that is not theirs, they can just destroy. That's why so many kids were killed in Ukraine, so many adults, Mariupol, the entire city gone. only because they are, as we call it, trigger happy. You know, if I have a tank, then I can use it because I'm
But,
frustrated.
maybe you can help me with this. What I don't understand, I just can't comprehend how Putin and the senior leadership in Russia can believe that after they do this destruction, that these people will actually want to join their country and become countrymen. And they have this attitude that they're liberating the Russian-speaking part of Ukraine, and that part is going to become part of Russia in the future. And I've read a fair amount about World War II. You've sort of experienced it living in Poland, but the same thing happened there. The Russians, devastated Poland twice. Once, in 1939, when they invaded Poland from the east as part of the Nazi Germany attack on Poland, and then when they liberated Poland from the Nazis in 44 and 45. The stories of destruction are amazing, and how they the story that I can remember forever is the Warsaw Uprising that occurred, and because this uprising was from people that they didn't agree with, the Bolshevik attitudes, the Russians stayed on the other side of the river and allowed the Warsaw to be devastated in 1944 and 1945, and then destroyed Poland all over again. And the same thing in Ukraine, very similar stories in Ukraine and the Holodomor, where supposedly 6 million people were starved to death by Stalin. But yet Poland and Ukraine became part of the Soviet, not the Soviet Empire. Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union. Poland wasn't, but it was part of the Soviet bloc. How can people become part of the Soviet Union of Russia after this killing, after this devastation, after this destruction, where you say 70% of your city was destroyed? How can that happen?
It never happened. One has to understand the history of Ukrainian people and Russia itself. If we go back to history, let's say to the 10th century, when the Russia was, in a sense, established. One has to remember that Russia is established by Vikings, or at least people who went from north south, and they started to explore. And this is actually huge land, and it's up for grabs. They went as far as Istanbul today, or Constantinople, and they explore entire country from north to south. Then they moved west, they moved east, and of course, when they moved west, then already Poland was there. So obviously there was a different tribe. Then they moved east, and east was absolutely open. So the Cossacks traveled through the country, and they discovered they can go as far as the eye can see. That's why Russia is such a huge country, because all of that happened over the centuries. But in the same time, if one understands history of Russia, then the brothers murdered brothers, the fathers murdered sons in order to gain power. And I think for me personally, this is the answer. Then the entire country, for what we know now, including Ukraine and Litva and Latvia and Baltic states, was based on the principle of killing. So obviously, when Ukraine gained independence 31 years ago, this year will be 31 years, because people believed and the independence was given to them centuries ago. One has to remember, Kyiv was established way before Moscow was. And Kyiv was the center of entire Russia at that time. But then the ethnicity played an important role. And we know it from Canadian experience, how difficult sometimes it is to accept that we are not the only people who lived in Canada. Each country has roots, and we learn through hardships, because I consider myself still a Canadian with a Polish background, or Polish Canadian, but I feel really deeply for all the things that we are experiencing as a people. So to answer your question, obviously it's impossible to envision that somebody would love Russians. Especially now, especially in the times when you have technology, when you have internet, when we have such a easy access to information. Half of it may be fake, but half of it is true. So always the question whom you're going to believe. And I remember a situation that I experienced when the Russians were in Afghanistan. Silly me, when I came to Poland, I lived in Toronto at that time, and when I went to Poland, Russians were leaving Poland. That was 81, 82. You could buy almost anything from Russians, I mean, including tank and maybe some missiles. So I picked up myself as a souvenir some Russian uniform from some, let's say, not the regular soldiers. It was a nice uniform that then somebody said, oh, somebody really did something. And on one occasion in Toronto, I put it on a jacket, and that was on Halloween. So I had a Russian jacket on me, right, as a sort of something that I can wear. And I will always remember, I went for a slice of pizza to the place that was run apparently by Afghani people in Toronto, and they chased me away. And that time I understood the power of evil. You know, I took the uniform off, I never wore it again, because I understood that this little symbol, silly for me, right, wearing for Halloween something, for them was the worst that possibly can ever see in Toronto. So I can only imagine that if somebody says, I love Russia, you know, I like Russian culture. I read a lot, you know, I've seen a lot of plays, I listen to a lot of music, but I cannot understand the evil behind lying to people, turning them against other people who are the same. Those people are the same. We are the same. Eastern Europeans are the same. We may speak different language. It sounds different, but we are the same people. So for me, it's very difficult to understand that we can actually use what are given to us, which is the language, to exercise power above some other people.
Language has been a force for disunity, for hatred, for strife for a long time. There's no question. Language and religion have kept us apart. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back more with Waldemar Plusa in just a minute. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting tonight with Waldemar Plusa, Val, who is a Rotary member in a city, the third largest city in Poland, in southwestern Poland, that has been accepting Ukrainian refugees, 200,000 Ukrainian refugees for a city of the population of 600,000 people. It's increased by a third in the last couple of weeks. And his Rotary organization is raising money. And that's why he contacted me, because we met in Toronto a couple of years ago to see if we could publicize the effort. Val, maybe I could ask you a question. I used to have a mother-in-law that was Polish and a father-in-law that was Ukrainian. And they would talk about how the Poles and the Ukes hated each other, and how the border between Poland and Ukraine went back and forth a couple hundred miles every couple of decades. But the Polish people have been unbelievably generous in the last while in accepting Ukrainian refugees. Tell me a little bit about the connection between Poland and Ukraine, if you could.
Well, one has to understand the history. As we know, it has its course. When one looks at Canada, for example, and you have a Quebec, and we have the rest of Canada, and yet the entire country is very diversified. People in PEI are different than people in Alberta. The same with Vancouver, the same with Ontario. We all are different, but we were able in Canada to bury the hatchet and to live. Sometimes we quarrel, like Quebec and the rest of Canada. Sometimes it's silly, sometimes it's serious, sometimes leads to tragic events. So I think we are the people who are the problem, because as you said, language and religion sometimes divide people greatly. So having said that, Ukraine and Poland at one point were together. Then people like Khmelnytsky happened, that we're talking about 16th, 17th century, where Khmelnytsky decided to join Poland and create union. And then he decided not to be in that union, to basically voice the opinion that he's going to kill all the Jews and Polacks because he doesn't like them. So he entrusted the country or the region of Ukraine to Russia. Khmelnytsky is a national hero of Ukraine. He's on an official currency, and he has many monuments in Ukraine. But then again, within the Ukraine, one has to remember the West Ukraine, it's different than the East Ukraine. As I said in Canada, we all are different because then we have regional leaders who will exercise every single means to change people's heads and say, well, because we live in a Western part of our country, the East is not ours. We have to be better than that. You know, it's a strong situation in which Poland and Ukraine history was carved. Of course, during the World War II, we have a lot of atrocities. A lot of people died. There was some extremely bad blood in our history, where 200,000 Polish people were murdered in Ukraine during the war. Of course, Poland was to some degree, well, it's hard to say who is guilty. Yeah, and I don't want to place any guilt. The only guilt I can place on anyone is on politicians and people who run the countries for their own profit. And I think during the war, it's very easy to see, especially now when you have Putin, who exercise his ability to control all the media and everything else to brainwash almost entire society. So I'm not surprised that during the war, when we had those atrocities, people were brainwashed, saying that, you know, in the village next door, where Poles were living, there are the bad people who are trying to kill us. So we better go and we do something about it. And we as a country experienced that, losing 3 million Jewish people. There were Polish Jews first, not Jewish Polish. This is absolutely huge questions, how we deal with that, you know, whom we gonna turn for a reason. We don't have authorities in the world. One would expect the United Nations will be that authority, that people will go and seek, you know, almost like a verdict, who is right and who is wrong. Nobody listens to that. I mean, we know that now, if there was if there was a strong voice from United Nations to stop the war, then the Russians would comply. But there was the hell with it. We not gonna listen. So that authority that we may have, the same with church. I mean, I'm looking at Pope Francis. I like him a lot, but he didn't do much to denounce Putin. He didn't do much to denounce the head of church in Russia, who apparently, I saw the interview, and that was absolutely sad for me to see somebody who exercised the power of religion on people to say this is the right war. There is no right war. There is no right violence anywhere. So again, we're coming back to the power of word. You know, if somebody is trying to be peaceful and will voice his opinion, then the peace is what matters the most. And he does something, a deed, to prove it, then it's up to us to take the same cause of action. That's why I believe you and I, belonging to Rotary Club, we know that there are things in life that we can do to make the life a bit better for other people, because if we do it for others, then it turns good to us as well. And
You
I think,
spent 20 years in Canada. You're now back in Poland. Some people have told me that one of the reasons why Putin wanted to invade Ukraine is he didn't want Ukraine to be as prosperous as Poland and be an example to his people about how capitalism and democracy can benefit them and their lives dramatically. How is the economy in Poland today? I've traveled through Poland a few times. I've traveled through Ukraine. And I traveled in Poland in the early 1990s, just after the war, the wall, Berlin Wall fell, and the Soviet Union broke apart, and it appeared extremely at the time backward economically. And then I traveled through Poland in 2006, I think it was, and Poland looked like St. Catharines. It wasn't Toronto yet, but it was very prosperous. It was industrial. It was economically growing. And in Ukraine, I got the same impression from Kiev. And then I also went to smaller towns like Poltava, which appeared sort of 10 or 20 years behind from an economic development standpoint. Tell me what you think about the economic progress in Poland today.
well, I think, from me being here off and on 12 years, I see tremendous change. I mean, from time to time, I travel to Warsaw because of my business. I deal in the field of culture. Warsaw changed dramatically. This is now a European city on a top level. Wrocław has the same ambition. There is a lot of build. Every single city in Poland benefits from being part of the European Union. And you're right, Putin may actually be afraid that if Ukraine will join UE, then the level of satisfaction of people living will increase dramatically, because you will not see that in Russia in my lifetime, because the poverty in Russia apparently is huge, and it's retained to be huge only because if you suppress people, then it's much easier to govern them. And Ukrainians were always looking to the West, which is to Poland, as a first step to see that things could be done. We have now a fairly decent system of highways. I remember times when I was traveling from Warsaw to Wrocław in 9 hours by car. Now I can do it in 3 hours, 15 minutes because of the highway and because of not excessive speeding. I remember times when the train was not with air conditioning. Now almost every train has AC and you can travel in comfort. The planes, the airfields, every major city has an airfield. You cannot tell that because you travel to Ukraine. I never did. Then they still behind. So the question is of this cultural change that we experience as a country. And I guess to a large degree, when we look Canada, I remember Canada when I came in 1981, 82, Toronto was started to boom. And that boom you can experience now. And Mississauga was just a city outside of Toronto, as we know, right? And now becoming part of this huge agglomeration of the cities in which main goal is to provide the inhabitants of this agglomeration with a decent standard of living. So one may be afraid that something like that, if it could be developed just across the border from Russia. When you look at Odessa, I don't know if you went to Odessa, but apparently this is a beautiful seashore resort city with a lot of tradition. It's absolutely beautiful architecture. Kiev, I never went, but you've been to Kiev. How beautiful the architecture is.
It's one of the most beautiful cities in the world. The only city that I've been in that rivals it is the old town of Krakow, which I thought was beautiful. And from what I understand, most of Krakow was spared during World War II. And so therefore,
it was spared, yeah. So,
a lot of the buildings are original.
It just amazes me that there is someone like Putin who will do that much evil, and behind all of that, obviously one has to remember it's a huge money. Oligarchs whom Russia produced. As I said, as an example, you know, like when we look at the richest people in the world, as we know, Bezos, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, and others, right? America has maybe 200 some odd billionaires. None of them left the country to live somewhere else. Really. I mean, you can almost drive yourself to the Bill Gates gates of his house in Washington and wave to him without being waved back to, right? In Russia, it's impossible. All of them who made huge money on robbing the economy of Russia, they left the country and they live elsewhere, making billions of dollars, treating themselves to the luxuries of this world, and trying to deal with a system that Putin created. I mean, this is the system of evil. This is the system created by someone who loves to hold the people almost in prison, because not every Russian was allowed to live. I mean, 160, or I believe close to 160 million people, maybe 10%, it's people who have idea that the Western world is not evil. There is no Nazis in Ukraine. Everybody knows that. But most
not
people
Russians.
who listen, a lot of people who listen to national news in Russia will say, yeah, Putin says there are Nazis in Ukraine, we have to fight them, right? Because they don't know any better. You know, and this is the power, unfortunately, of media, which works for some people and some don't.
We're chatting tonight with Waldemar, who is a Rotary Club member in a small town, the third largest town, actually, not a small town, the third largest town in Poland that's accepted 200,000 Ukrainian refugees, and he's launched an effort to assist them, and he's reaching out to Rotary clubs around the world to assist them. We're going to take a break and come back more, where I'm going to ask Val exactly what his Rotary Club is doing and what they want from other Rotary clubs around the world. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting tonight with Waldemar Plusa, who is a Rotary Club member in Wrocław. Is that correct?
Wrocław.
Wrocław, which is a town of 600,000 people in southwestern Poland. They've had 200,000 Ukrainian refugees come to the city over the course of the last couple of weeks. And his Rotary Club has launched an effort to assist them. Val, tell me exactly what your Rotary Club is doing, if you could.
Well, we are concentrating on helping the people with everyday life. Yesterday, the huge truckload of goods came from good people, Rotarians from France. We unloaded it at one of the schools, of which a friend of mine's a director. He's also a Rotary Club member. And he started unadvertised, for example, effort to teach Ukrainian people Polish language. So they become, like I was in Canada, I didn't attend any school in a sense to learn English. And I know my brother did, for example, who came to Canada a year earlier than I did. Anyway, we figure we're going to pay for it. And yesterday, 100 women came because they feel that they wanted to learn, they want to learn Polish in order to be useful. And we pay for it. We're reaching out to the Rotarian and not only Rotarian communities with an effort to collect small amounts of money so we can run more programs like that. We would like to have enough money to rent, let's say, 1 or 2 apartments and to rotate the people in those apartments for maybe 2 or 3 months. But in the last month, the rent in the city of Wrocław became almost impossible. It increased quite dramatically, and it's almost to the level of, let's say, 1-bedroom apartment in city of Wrocław, half decent, not top notch, half decent, you still have to pay around $600 a month plus utilities. It's not like in Canada, you rent the apartment, everything is included, you just move in, put your furniture, and you're done. So it's a huge effort. Our club is only 18, 20 members. We tax ourselves to the membership fees and to additional money that we collect in order to help the people in need. I devise a brochure, almost like asking for Rotary Club members, not only Rotary Club members, to maybe obligate themselves with a $10 a month, not a day, a month. So from the $10 collected, let's say we have 100 people, we have $1,000. $1,000, it's 3,000 zlotys. We can run 3 courses of how to learn Polish in a month, and pay 3,000 zlotys to the teacher or teachers. So things like that are absolutely needed.
If people want to donate, is there a website they can go to, or how do they contact?
There is we have a website, and I can give you the address, so I can send it to you by email. And because I administer that website to some degree, I can also put a PDF file that explains what we are trying to achieve and what we are trying to do with the money that it's collected. For example, we have somebody from the club in Germany, from Hamburg. They are transferring to us 2,500 euros for those efforts. Another club in Berlin donated a few thousand euros as well, because with that money we can do much more than we can do with things. Things we can organize ourselves, like clothing, food, all the necessities of everyday life, but something that requires money, as simple as that. So our effort is to sort of collect enough money that we can at least help those people to be prepared to, let's say, get a job in Poland. The lady that we met yesterday, she was in a travel industry business in Ukraine, and she already knows that because she went from place to place, and said, and they told her, your experience is great, but you have to speak the language. I experienced that myself as a Polish Canadian. Yep. When I was looking for a job and my English was much worse than it's now, almost non-existent, how difficult it was to be comprehensible, to be understood by someone else who is willing to give me a chance to work. So for me, as we both know, the language is the crucial issue. And then the rest comes. I mean, we have, out of the 200,000 refugees that came through Wrocław, maybe 1/4 are the kids. My partner, she works at school, and that school already has around 20 Ukrainian kids who have no clue, because the language is similar, but it's different. So they cannot miss education.
Yep, they need to be taught.
How you assist that? It's all money, unfortunately.
Well, I congratulate you and your Rotary Club for what you're doing. I know we're connected on LinkedIn, and so therefore that's one way that people can contact you. And I'll post with the show the website that you send me. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your story, your thoughts, your views on Russia, on Ukraine, on Poland with us. And thank you for what you and your Rotary Club are doing to help the Ukrainian refugees. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to say that war is no good for nobody, any war. I mean, we are the same people. What I learned in Canada, it's priceless, because this is the only country that I can give as an example that we can coexist. We don't have to love each other, because I may like beer and somebody likes water. But that difference does not disqualify us from being the part of human race. So I'm all for peace and for understanding, and for communicating. I appreciate Brian to take his time and to invite me to be part of your listening audience. I hope that the war ends soon, and I hope that we all be able to travel to see with our own eyes what and how beautiful the world is. I invite everybody to Poland, regardless of who they are, because through that we can always learn that we are all the same.
Peace, understanding, communication, and realizing that we're all the same. Thank you so much for joining us. That's our show for tonight, everybody. I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online at www.saga960am.ca, even from southwestern Poland. You can get all my podcasts and videocasts on briancrombie.com. Good night, everybody.